Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Digital Transformation Thursdays. I'm sorry we started late. We're having some technical problems. We're supposed to stream to Facebook this afternoon, but for one reason or another, we're having problems um, starting the link, the stream to YouTube. Sorry, the stream to live stream to Facebook. But it's 4 p.m. It's 4 p.m. So we want to start on time. And this is an important. Our session today is an important topic, which is a phenomenon that I was previously unaware of until I watched a documentary about this. I'm not sure where I caught it. I think I caught it on Netflix or online on YouTube, and it talks about this phenomenon in the Philippines of online sexual exploitation of children. And I remember it got to a point where one of the top officials in the Philippines was saying that top law enforcement officials in the Philippines was saying that the Philippines was a center, global center for this kind of problem. And our guests today, I think, are uniquely qualified to talk about this problem because they have been at the forefront of really trying to help the children who are affected, and not just help the children, but actually actively prosecute these people. Few things in life, I think, are as black and white as this, and there's nothing redeeming, socially redeeming, or nothing positive that comes from this phenomenon. And I'm very pleased that we have as our guests those who are really at the forefront and understand this problem, and they're actually doing something. And they are Lawrence Aritao and Caleb Carroll from International Justice Mission. Lawrence was a student of mine. He's a graduate of the UP College of Law. After he graduated from Ateneo de Manila for his undergraduate degree, he's an Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity in Southeast Asia. He joined IJM when he passed the bar, started as a legal clerk way back in 2008, rose to special counsel for interventions for 2008 to 2013, and then he was director for legal intervention and is now the national director for prosecution and development. He's also a photography enthusiast. His colleague, Caleb Carroll, we will see in a moment, is the internet crimes against children specialist at IJM. He started his career as a sheriff, a deputy sheriff at the Anderson County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina, where he was a deputy sheriff, rising to corporal and detective for a period from 2009 to 2019. He has a degree, a BS in criminal justice with a minor in psychology from the University of Cincinnati, and is currently pursuing a Master's of Science in Global Technology and Development at the Arizona State University. So I'd like you guys to turn on your cams and so the audience can see you. There you go, Lawrence and Caleb. So I guess I just want everyone to know that this is a what's the word? Quite a sacrifice for Caleb to be here with us. It's he's out there in South Carolina, and it's 4 a.m. 4 a.m. No, Caleb? Is that right? Okay. So I'll leave it to you guys to continue. Lawrence?
Thank you, JJ, and hello to everyone joining us this afternoon. I'm going to share the screen that I have with you. It should be right in front of you right now. And it is indeed a genuine pleasure to be with all of you. I want to thank those who've taken time to be with us to talk about the dark reality of online sexual exploitation of children. A little bit about myself. I'm a father of 3 wonderful children. And I'm telling you that because I have a feeling that at one point, a tiny little head might pop out and into the frame to join us as our special guest. So you've been duly warned if that happens. But it's a welcome thing to have the life of our children just being here with us. And for me, it also underlines why it's really important to actually be talking about how to protect our children because they are indeed a treasure in our own lives. And for the past 12 years, as JJ mentioned, I've actually been working with International Justice Mission. It's been a great joy to be part of this team. It's actually a global organization that protects people in poverty from violence. And around the world, we have a global presence. We are in 13 countries addressing, very specific crime types: forced labor, slavery, sex trafficking. In the Philippines, it's online sexual exploitation of children. And our teams do that by working side by side with law enforcement, with prosecution, with the DOJ, the National Prosecution Service, working shoulder to shoulder. We have social workers that also work alongside with their DSWD, or Department of Social Welfare and Development counterparts, to give that support that the system might need to better care for survivors, represent them in court, and make sure that there is accountability. Everywhere we go, whatever program, the mission is the same: to protect people in poverty from violence by strengthening justice systems, rescuing and restoring victims, bringing criminals to justice, and scaling demand for correction. The big idea, or some people like to call it the theory of change, uh, it's is that you can end violence by ending impunity. And to just unpack that a little bit, what we mean is holding violent offenders accountable dramatically reduces the abuse of the vulnerable. Robust law enforcement and effective prosecution protect not only those who are rescued, but thousands, even millions of others who will never be abused. There is, in fact, a preventive effect when done correctly. And we just wanted to share that that idea, that concept, is not just cerebral. It's actually played out in our programs, different communities, Cebu, Manila, and Pampanga, for instance. And this is a prevalence reduction that was recorded regarding the crime type of minors being sold for sex in establishments and streets. So we had a reduction of 79% in Cebu, 75% in Manila, 86% in Pampanga. And along with my family, we've actually, lived and worked in those cities with IJM. And so I was able to bear witness to the incredible efforts of law enforcement, of prosecutors that cared a lot more about more than just winning, but winning in a way that also protects children as they prosecute cases. We've seen judges that are incredibly fair, impartial, and yet are able to understand the needs of children in their courtroom. And so in each of those communities, I've seen that the big idea holds true. It isn't just a cerebral thing. There was indeed an impact that could be felt by families, by communities, the good that comes out of accountability and ending impunity. Now, before I go too far into the discussion, we wanted to give you an overview just so you have an idea. What do we have in store for this afternoon? We're actually going to hear from Caleb very soon for part one. So Caleb is going to tell us what OSEC is, how it's committed. He's going to discuss the OSEC study, the Philippine Internet Crimes Against Children Center, which is doing incredible work here in the Philippines in collaboration with partners around the world. And then we're going to pause for a 2-minute interlude to hear the voice of a survivor, to really listen to what her experience was. Then we move to part two. Some of you are probably very interested in this. How do you do OSEC disruption and prosecution in the time of COVID-19? And what's going on now that we're in the middle of a pandemic? Part three will be what we can do as a community. And I'll be talking about that with Caleb. Then we'll use the balance of time for a question and answer portion. So, Caleb, over to you.
Well, thank you, Attorney Law. And I'm super excited to be with y'all today. And then a little bit about me. So Attorney Law shared a little bit about himself. When when we did the run through, it was really interesting because he talked about how in each city IJM had worked, he had had a baby in each city, including the pandemic baby in Manila. Well, I don't have a baby in each city like he does, but we do share the unique distinction of having pandemic babies. My youngest son, pictured there, was born in Manila in May under ECQ. So that was a really exciting experience. And I also have an older son, and I started in law enforcement. It seems like forever ago, back in 2006, and I've done everything from be a patrol officer, supervisor, to K9 work. You see there my former K9 partner Amy, and then the last bit of that was leading a team conducting investigations on crimes against children. So I've been doing it for a while, and I'll tell you another story about myself later on that I hope will be interesting to you. So Nelson Mandela said, and I want us to remember this for later, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. So now let's talk about what OSEC, or the online sexual exploitation of children, looks like in the Philippines, and kind of how that works in the predominant cases that we're seeing. So IJM, we recognize that OSEC, right, it can mean very broad things depending on the audience, and depending on what either prosecutorial or law enforcement or judiciary body you're talking to. You know, it can encompass quite a bit of activity regarding to child exploitation and abuse online. When Attorney Law and I are talking, though, we add this definition because IJM, we're focusing on a very specific subset of OSEC, that is the trafficking aspect. And so that's the production of this content, this sexual abuse content. And it can be photos, videos, but the predominant mass of what we're seeing in the Philippines is live streaming sexual abuse. And it's distinctly for a third party who's not in the physical presence of the victim in exchange for compensation. So that's the trafficking side of that. And that's uniquely what Attorney Law and I will be discussing. So I recognize many of you are probably parents, right? And so we're going to give you a really good taste on how you can use your voice and use your expertise to leverage for kids that are being trafficked. And you're probably wondering, right, if you're a parent, how can I keep my kids safe? Well, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to talk about that, but the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the United States has some really, really good content for families on keeping your kids safe. And they also have age-appropriate content for your children to learn about proper online activities as well. So what we see in this trafficking section of OSEC, right, is you have sexually motivated offenders that want the content. They're typically in Western nations such as the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, the UK, and they connect with traffickers here in the Philippines who unfortunately often are family members or close associates to the child. And so they connect via public surface level platforms that you and I use every day, right? So that's the alarming thing, is that this isn't a hidden dark web crime. This is very much a surface level crime. So they connect, they figure out what's being offered. The sexually motivated offender then sends via money transfer agency. So again, a very surface level platform that's commonly used in the Philippines, sends money back to the trafficker, and then the content is exchanged. Again, that can be pre-recorded or pre-captured, but a very, very large majority of what we see is this live streaming. So it quite literally becomes pay-per-view sexual abuse of children, and it's custom ordered, which is just really kind of heartbreaking and horrendous to consider. And is also the reason that we think that OSEC, this trafficking OSEC, is one of the most damaging forms of online exploitation. So why the Philippines, right? Why does the Philippines become one of the global hotspots for this, according to UNICEF and other places, right? Well, we've identified through our collaborative casework with the Philippine government some enabling factors that we think contribute to that. So number one is that the Philippines has a really robust and easy to use money transfer agency infrastructure. And just to be clear, I'm not anti-MTA, right? This is a really important part of the Philippine economy. And in the most recent World Bank data, around 32% of Filipinos have bank accounts, which means they're very, very dependent on this as a way to send and move money, especially for OFWs overseas sending money back. So the unfortunate thing is this very narrow section of sexually motivated offenders and traffickers are utilizing that to their advantage. It's lucrative, right? And you have these disparities in economy. So what I mean by that, in the US, for example, $100 is not a ton of money, about 5,000 pesos. However, 5,000 pesos, if you did several shows a day for multiple days a week, it would only take you a few days to make the average Filipino salary. And so then you multiply that over the course of a month. And so it's cheap for people, the sexually motivated offenders that want it, and lucrative in the context of the economy for the people here. So that's what we mean by that. You have widespread inexpensive internet access. Everybody in the Philippines, internet penetration in the Philippines is quite incredible. Most of that is via prepaid cellular service. And then the ubiquity of broadcast cable cameras. Every phone, I can't think of one that doesn't have a web camera. And then this concept of relative impunity. And so this is really tricky, and I want to explain this because the Philippine government, the Interagency Council Against Trafficking, so IACAT, the Philippine National Police, the National Bureau of Investigations, government prosecutors have done an incredible job fighting trafficking issues in the Philippines. I'll talk about that a little more later. So this isn't that the Philippine government is ignoring it. A couple things here. We need more of them, right? We need more cyber cops, so to speak, more cyber cops than cyber crooks, is the way that you'd hear that term sometimes. And then we also really need the tech and financial sector to come along with us and help us innovate new detection technologies. Because right now, traffickers and sexually motivated offenders can use these surface level platforms because they don't have to be scared of being caught for the most part. And then, of course, you have common language proficiency. So, the sexually motivated offender does not have to use a middle person or a translator because people in the Philippines speak quite good English. So this is a map from the OSEC study, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But this is IP addresses that are linked to child sexual abuse material. And then so the IP address in the Philippines, and then the connecting IP address foreign. And so the reason I add this is I think it's a really powerful illustration. It's so visually intuitive and shows us that this is a global problem, right? So we have to think globally and act locally on this issue, right? Like international collaboration is a major, major part of combating OSEC. So now let's talk about the OSEC study. The OSEC study was really quite ambitious. So it was a partnership between IACAT and the US Department of State under the Child Protection Compact with the Philippine government. And then in addition to numerous other government partners that participated. It would take me probably the rest of my presentation time to list them all. But the main like implementing partners were IACA, IJM, and the U.S. Department of State. And so we did this study on case data from 2011 to 2017. The reason we cut off at 2017 is, first off, for a study, you have to have a cutoff point somewhere. And B, we were trying to measure prevalence of OSEC towards the beginning of IJM's project on OSEC, which would have been about 2015. So what we discovered is that prevalence is really, really difficult to find and define, but we learned some other really, really interesting things. And you can actually get a full copy of the study for free there at that QR code or at that tiny URL link. Anyways, so we reviewed cases as part of this, and we discovered that all of the traffickers communicated in English. So that confirms that one enabling factor we talked about, the language proficiency. Most of the traffickers communicated and exchanged materials on the surface of the web, right? They're not hiding it. This isn't cryptocurrency. This isn't the dark web and Tors. This is quite literally being done on apps that you and I use nearly daily. And then, so we learned that financial motivation, or not so much learned, confirmed really, that financial motivation was a major factor in the crime. So we found in 83% of the cases we reviewed, there was direct tangible evidence that there was a financial exchange. And so that's statistically quite significant. And then the heartbreaking things that we learned are that you don't have one trafficker harming one child. Almost the average number of victims per case was 4, and we had 10 cases involving 10 or more victims. So a trafficker will harm and traffic multiple children. And then without any kind of intervention, the abuse lasted for years. We know that this abuse doesn't just stop. The people don't just suddenly wake up and say, okay, we've made enough money, we're doing good now. This abuse will continue without intervention. The really heartbreaking things is we found, so this is updated, this is our study data plus some through May 28th, 2020. So we found that the median age of OSEC victims was 11 years old, and that's alarming. That's much, much younger than quote unquote traditional trafficking, sex trafficking. Typically in more traditional sex trafficking, you see mid to older teens. But here we're seeing very, very young children predominantly being sold and trafficked. 45% of OSEC victims are 12 or younger. 9% were under the age of 3. And then the youngest victim that our partners have rescued as part of our collaborative casework was less than a month old. So just really kind of horrific, eye-popping statistics there. So again, I want to circle back. The Philippine government has actually been quite progressive and proactive in trying to combat trafficking in the Philippines and combat OSEC. The Philippine National Police Women and Children Protection Center, so PNPWCPC, and the National Bureau of Investigation's Anti-Human Trafficking Division, NBI-ATRAD, among others, DOJ, Office of Cybercrime. This involves prosecutors. You just, again, there's not enough of them. We need more. We need more help, but they've done an incredible job. And that was seen in 2016. The Philippines earned Tier 1 status in the U.S. Department of State Trafficking in Persons Report. They've maintained that every single year, including the most recent year. And I just want to draw our eyes to the Tier 1 placements. So that's not Tier 1 placements regionally. Those are Tier 1 placements in the entire world. So these are the countries that are doing the best job at combating trafficking. And as you can see, that's a very small and exclusive list. So yeah, we know that this works, right? And IJM, we distinctly know that this model of collaborative approach works. So our OSEC project was launched in the Q4 of 2015. And since then, you can see there that the rescues, arrests, operations, and convictions have skyrocketed. And that rescue, so this is good through Q2 of 2020. We are now above 700 children rescued. So just incredible what can be done when, you know, governments and non-government organizations internationally collaborate on this issue. The other really quite incredible initiative that we've seen was that the PMPWCPC and NBI OTRAD are leading this really innovative and collaborative international effort called the Philippine Internet Crimes Against Children Center, affectionately called the PICAC, or if any of my Australian colleagues are tuning into this, they call it the PICAC. And this is an international collaborative approach that they're leading that involves official partnership between them and with the Australian Federal Police, the United Kingdom National Crime Agency, and International Justice Mission. And this allows this international collaborative crime fighting approach to take place. And since its founding, we've drawn a lot more interest from the international law enforcement community. And this has really become a powerful tool in combating OSEC. There's actually discussions in place now to add another international government partner to this. I won't announce anything more because that's their place and the PNP and NBI's place to announce that appropriately. But I say that just to highlight that people around the world are taking notice of the things that NBI, PNP, DOJ, OOC, that these Philippine law enforcement agencies are doing. So that's going to be the situationer for me. I'm gonna be quiet now and let you hear from a survivor of OSEC, and then I will come back later and tell you a little bit about my journey into this fight.
I'm paid for every disgusting show that I will do in front of the computer, in front of the camera with the customer. And while doing that every disgusting show, I lost every bit of my self-esteem. And to the point that I felt disgusted of myself as well. Actually, the customer demands for the shows. For example, they will tell you what to do. And then if you won't obey your customer, my trafficker would give you consequences, just like what I told you earlier. They will starve you, they won't give you anything, just like that. And if you refuse to talk to your customer, they take over. It's like being trapped in a dark room without any rays of light at all. And there's no point of leaving at all, something like that, because you do disgusting shows every day, every time, and then after doing that you go to sleep, and then you repeat the same routine every day, and it's like there's no ending at all. The healing process, it wasn't easy at all. It took me years to recover from that painful experiences, from the traumatic experiences. You know, at night, when someone suddenly turns off the light, I would like suddenly get up from my bed, and you can just sleep without light because you're so afraid of dark. That's what it left me. That's where it left me for years.
Yeah, I think that's just incredibly powerful to hear it from the voice of a survivor of this crime. And I know that probably moves you as much as it does me every time I hear it. So Thank you for your attention. I'll talk to you again soon. And back to you, Attorney Law.
Thank you, Caleb. Hello again to everyone. I'm sure that some of you are very interested in hearing, what's going on now that there's COVID-19. It's not like the risks to children disappear just because there's a pandemic, or it's not like criminal intent just goes away just because there is a global pandemic. So, and you're right to think that um, it's a perfect storm, really, when you have quarantined offenders abroad at home, not able to go anywhere or do anything. And then you also have children on lockdown in the Philippines who are locked down with their traffickers. Some of the important observations that partners have made in this very difficult season include an increase in image-based offending, 86%. That's from the Australian E-Safety Commissioner. Our partners at the Australian Federal Police and the Australia Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, and I apologize for the missing C there, they report that child sexual abuse sites were crashing due to heightened traffic, so much volume and demand that they broke the system that was supposed to be feeding the data to the users. We also see increased downloading of child sexual exploitative materials, which is CSEM. In Spain, Denmark authorities reported access attempts to such materials as well from their side. The We Protect Global Alliance has actually cautioned everyone that there's a highly probable risk that OSEC will increase. So it's against this backdrop of heightened risk and very real dangers for children that we believe the power and the good that comes out of law enforcement and prosecution becomes even more important, because this is the moment when our children need it the most. This is the moment when the Filipino children need their law enforcers, the prosecutors, social workers to step up. And we're very happy to share that our partners have indeed risen to that challenge. And we included these statistics as a sign of hope that even though the virus is prevalent and the end is not very near in sight, rescues can happen. And so there actually have been 16 instances since March 16, 2020, some of these during the enhanced community quarantine. 16 child protective rescue operations, 81 actual rescued children, and 17 convictions. So even the justice system, even the Supreme Court stepped up, if you look at it that way, that at a time when children really needed the system to be working, they found a way. And so we had 17 convictions, and a majority, I think it's around 10 convictions, involved the promulgation through video conference hearing. And so again, this webinar is about digital transformation. I mean, it is happening in different places. It is happening in the system that protects children. Of course, the sort of underlying and very important policy of the Philippines, the Philippine law, is to uphold the best interests of the child. And every single figure in that last slide is a testament that this principle is at work. 16 actual rescue operations, the 81 children that were rescued, and the very fact that courts have found a way to remain operational and to work to accord the rights of the parties that are appearing before them. That's a sign that they are upholding the best interests of the child, and of course, safeguarding the human dignity of those that appear before them. And it's just a quick reminder of the demographic we're working with and that we are interested in serving, talking about very young victims, usually 12 and below for at least 45% of cases. And complicating that, a lot of the offenders are also family members, relatives, or close adults who unfortunately are also the people that the children need for their own protection. So if you can imagine yourself in that position where the main people in your life, the main adults in your life that are supposed to protect and nurture you and look after you have now become the perpetrators, and there is a case that's been filed, an adversarial proceeding. Um, and sometimes those proceedings can take years. One of the most dangerous portions of a survivor's journey to recovery is that zone where they're working through the court system, where there is a case filed. And so we're just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the measures that we've seen effective in protecting children that move through the court system. And we'll start with one of the most effective tools, one of the most powerful ones. Many of you may have already heard that plea agreements have been very helpful in protecting children from re-traumatization. Some of you may be aware that the Department of Justice has released an advisory that recognizes this as a helpful tool when it is appropriate. And what happens in a plea agreement or a plea bargain is the accused is actually going to admit guilt. And in return, the sentence will be lower because they're admitting guilt to a lesser but necessarily included offense. So for example, their penalty might go down from life imprisonment to 20 years or from 20 years to 15, as the case may be. And what the victim gets in return is that peace of mind that they don't have to be placed in these adult adversarial proceedings, giving testimony against a loved one, even though it's the right thing to do um, on paper. To ask that of a child is incredibly unwise. In fact, I have a dear friend who is a public prosecutor, and she has openly championed sparing children from having to be in court. And she mentions it a lot. That one of the wisest things we can do is to keep children, especially children of tender age, away from the courtroom. You know, we don't want to be building cases on, on the testimony of very young children. And of course, in certain cases, pre-verbal victims would not even be able to serve as witnesses. And so plea agreements have served as a very powerful protective measure. And there have already been 103 convictions. This is a bit of an update from what Caleb shared earlier, which was in quarter 2 of this year. We were at about 90 that we know of. Now it's at 103. And I'm just pleased to share with you that in 83 of those cases, these were facilitated through plea agreements. And that really meant that they're sparing children from that um, difficult travail through the court system and contributing to their recovery. And we've seen courts fully aware of the power of this measure. We've even seen judges that also allow a family conference to happen after a guilty verdict is rendered to start planting the seeds of restoration and the seeds of reform in the offenders and, of course, within the families that have been fractured by this crime. The other thing we've seen very helpful is a 20-year-old tool that the Supreme Court created in the rule on examination of a child witness. And a lot of practitioners, maybe some law students here or members of the legal community are probably very familiar with that rule. And they know that you can actually preserve testimony electronically if you follow the rule correctly and you come out with what is called a video in-depth interview. Very helpful. It's usually conducted by a multidisciplinary team or a trained law enforcer. And the value is tremendous. You can reduce the number of times a victim needs to tell their story. And again, you heard it from Ruby, how difficult it is for her to even recount it. And so sparing them that is incredibly valuable. And then you have testimony preserved in a format that is actually acknowledged by the Supreme Court as admissible and valid when the proper requirements are met. So that's been incredibly helpful. And the impact on the community has been, out of the 142 children that were actually interviewed during during the inquest proceedings right after rescue, 102 were spared from having to appear before a prosecutor who would then decide if the case should proceed to trial. At the same time, many of them also benefited from not having to appear in court in the 18 convictions that were achieved, which also had the benefit of children who had VDs just in case a full trial was necessary. And so it's just a sense of being very cautious and careful when a child is involved and making sure that if there is a protection available to them, our partners are able to provide that. And it's something that's not difficult to take. You just need a camera, of course, a computer to transfer the video once it's done, and you can actually give the media. Usually it's a USB drive that's given to the prosecutor, who can then view later on to verify for themselves what it is the survivor went through. So that's been very helpful. The next two we're going to share very briefly became very helpful. Well, actually, this next one is very helpful in the pandemic and actually didn't exist until COVID-19. It's one of those things that I'm amazed by. The, the DOJ and the Supreme Court both came out with measures that would allow parties to appear at inquest remotely and appear also in courts remotely. And if you've been following the issuances from the Office of the Court Administrator, uh, first and second level courts, all of them that have the accounts and capacity, are now able to do video conferencing hearings in all proceedings at whatever stage. And so we're seeing that you can actually have a survivor right after rescue, for example, and this happened in a particular case with 7 victims, the youngest 3, the oldest 12, and each one of those victims did not have to appear before a prosecutor. Instead, they were at a safe place, joining through a Zoom conference or a Zoom call, appearing before the prosecutor, and the prosecutor was able to propound her child-friendly or child-appropriate questions through that call and go through the process with the least amount of harm to the child. They don't have to travel. They don't have to be exposed to potential, the virus that was still very much a risk for them and still is now, right? And so this remote victim appearance was a very good measure, and we are hoping that a permanent version of this can persist even after COVID-19. Finally, one thing we celebrate is that our prosecutors, our public prosecutors, have reached just a point in their ability to move cases forward where they know they can build strong cases without victim testimony. They know that there's digital evidence. They know how to present it. There are expert witnesses that they can bring to illumine the court on why there was like thousands of child sexual abuse materials found in the possession of the accused and why they can attribute ownership and intent to distribute. They also know that there's law enforcement evidence that is directly able to prove the elements of the offense, especially when the crime involves a transaction for a live show. So there are strong cases without victim testimony, and it is one of the wisest things that we can do to spare children from having to appear in court. Of course, the journey of a survivor will not end with a win in court. I mean, they might get the conviction, but the needs and the journey remain. And so we wanted to share with you just a little bit about what is necessary for a survivor to continue his or her journey of restoration. Naturally, right after rescue and in time of crisis, they need a safe place to land, a safe form of trauma-informed placement, and then they need structure and return to normalcy. They need to feel like their lives are falling back into a good kind of order where they're safe and protected. And they also need strong trauma service that caters to their need for healing. Trauma wounds exist after being exposed to OSEC, to online sexual exploitation of children, and they need services that meet them where they need them. They need it the most. And also long-term options. And very important that a survivor is surrounded by a community of care that is not going to leave them until they are healed. This is just to show you that, the court case, legal protection, and all of that, it's just one of 6 domains of restoration. There's safety, mental well-being, economic empowerment, social support, and physical well-being And all of these are like the minimum requirements so that a survivor actually reaches a point of restoration. So very important that these exist. And of course, question some of you might be asking is it possible then, given the complexity of this journey, is it possible for them to reach a point of wholeness and restoration? And I'm happy to share the answer is yes. And we have some numbers that show the lives that have been changed and affected by, by good aftercare, by communities of care that come around survivors. So in Cebu, in 2018, there were 15 survivors that reached a point of restoration. But in 2019, that number jumped to 34. In Manila, 2018, there were 4 who had reached restoration. By 2019, that number had jumped to 19. So we're sharing that as just an illustration of the hope that exists, and that it really is worth it to invest in our survivors and to journey with them, because restoration and wholeness is possible. In fact, the main goal is to reach a point in our work where deterrence and prevention of OSEC has succeeded, which is usually the result of effective law enforcement and victim or child protective prosecution. The end goal is to see less and less victims needing care and rescue, because there has been a preventive sort of effect from all of the work that the government and its partners are doing. And that is the end goal in mind. Of course, understanding the value of the one survivor and staying true with them as they journey through recovery. As we're moving now to the part of our webinar, which I think a lot of us have been waiting for, which is, what can we do as a community? And to kind of jump off into that question, I want to read this quote again that is actually a favorite of ours. There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. And so I'm going to speak to some of you right now that are part of a specific sector, fellow law practitioners and members of the academe. One of the things we believe we can do to really ensure that child protective measures stay in place past the pandemic season or era is to support long-term judicial resilience at the system and individual level, the level of like the system as a whole and the courts themselves, to really come alongside and imagine together with the system and test out solutions. We're just delighted to see that now victims can appear remotely when before that wasn't even a possibility. And it's because there was this attempt from the system to adjust. And so we urge our fellow practitioners to keep that momentum. Those of you who like to publish and write, bring out your best thinking and make it known, put it out there. Personally, our experience has been that the Supreme Court, through the Office of the Court Administrator, is very willing to receive casework data, statistics from your own experience, and use that to craft solutions. So that is an area that I hope we can move toward together. And to talk to other communities that are present on this webinar, I'm going to turn you over to Caleb for a bit. Caleb.
So now talking to now we're going to talk to the non-justice system connected people necessarily, right? So if there's anybody attending or watching this that's from the tech and financial sector, we really need you to come along with us. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. The existing detection technologies and reporting on OSEC is simply not enough, and we need to be able to intervene. We absolutely need the tech and financial sector to innovate, to invest, and become our strongest partners in this fight. And then if you're a community member, if you're a family, right? Like you're probably wondering, how does this really apply to me? And so this slide's going to be up for a bit because I'm going to share a story for you at the end. But you are a voice in your communities, right? Like you can talk to the companies that you're using online. You can talk to the financial companies that you bank with and that you use. you can talk to your elected officials and your government officials and ask them, what are you doing on this issue, right? There is power in that. There is power in that wave of support and awareness. And you can ask for those things. So I want to share with all of you. So now we're talking to everybody. So lawyers, academics, if you tuned out for a minute, come back. So some of you may have wondered or may not, how does a guy from South Carolina, right, me, end up in Metro Manila combating this issue of OSEC? And I recognize I'm back in South Carolina right now, but my wife and I live in Metro Manila. We relocated entirely there. We're back right now actually because our oldest son was supposed to join us for the birth of his brother in May in the Philippines, but when COVID locked everything down, we stayed to continue this important work and to have our baby in the Philippines. And it was just time to come back and support him for a little while. But after the holiday season, when the borders open up for foreigners, we will return to our home in Metro Manila. So we entirely relocated for this. And the reality is that if you would have asked 20-year-old Caleb, if we could go back, if we could time travel back and ask Caleb, hey, 20-year-old, A, don't do anything else dumb, which I did lots of dumb stuff as a young person. But B, we would say, could you imagine yourself being in the Philippines combating OSEC? And I guarantee you that 20-year-old Caleb would probably laugh and blow us off. Because it just wasn't anywhere on my radar then, right? Like this wasn't part of any plan I had. It's something that God and life led me to. And so, I got into law enforcement back in 2006, like I said, and had moved up through all these specialties and was conducting investigations on crimes against children. So child sexual assault, child physical abuse. And I was leading that team when one day my boss walked into my office and he said, and so this kind of work is called ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, which is where my title kind of stems from. So my boss walks in and says, hey, Caleb, the South Carolina Internet Crimes Against the ICAC Task Force has said that we have a backlog of cases. As a member of that task force, somebody needs to work them. You're the guy, right? So, I mean, I was like, well, okay, boss, like you signed the paycheck. So, I remember the first thing you do, right, is most of these cases in the US are generated from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children cyber tips or NCMEC cyber tips. And you download this and it has the child sexual abuse material in there because you have to look at it, A, to catalog it for future court purposes and legal documents. But B, you got to know what kind of case you're working with, right? You have to, as the enforcer, you have to take a glance at it. And I'll never forget, like I said, my boss walked in, tells me this, I pull my first case. And I'll never forget that first image of a young boy, less than 5 years old, being sexually abused. And I had seen a lot of bad things through my career, right? I had responded to a school shooting in 2016. By this point, I had heard at least 100 children recount their sexual abuse in forensic interviews. But nothing prepared me for the moment that I visually saw that child being sexually abused. And I remember that it was a very visceral and like a physical reaction. I was sick. I was sick to my stomach. And I stomped down the office, told my boss, fire me. I'm not doing this. You can fire me, reassign me, whatever you need to do. I'm not doing it. And my boss said, well, hold on a second. Just finish this case. I think he was going on vacation or was on vacation. So he said, finish this case and we'll deal with it when I get back, right? I said, okay, you know, I will do that. So we end up investigating. I find the IP address where that resolves back to, the location it resolves to. We do a search warrant on the house. And I'll never forget, we found tons of child sexual abuse material on this guy's computer. But I'll never forget looking at the walls, and he had advertisements for jobs to be the Easter Bunny for children. And he had flyers for children's roller skating nights. And I'll never forget that feeling as a professional, that maybe we were able to stop children from being sexually abused, right? The sad reality is he probably had abused sexually abused children, but we stopped something. And it was like a light bulb got clicked on for me, right? Like it became my passion. I went back to my boss. I said, whoa, don't fire me. Give me every ICAT case you can find. I'm your guy. So I started working on ICAT cases. I was the ICAT guy. And so one day I'm sitting at my desk and an email comes in and it says, International Justice Mission is looking for an ICAC specialist in the Philippines to combat OSEC. And my wife, when we were running through this yesterday, my wife shared with me, Caleb, you got the story wrong. So she has corrected my story. So I picked up the phone and I said, because it was just, I felt very called and communicated to when I saw this email. Picked up the phone, I called my wife. I said, hey, what do you think about moving to the Philippines? And, you know, she's a small town girl from the coast of South Carolina. She said, I don't even know what the Philippines is. Where is that? And so I knew where it was because my grandpa had lived here when he was in the U.S. Air Force. But I said, okay, well, she said, I'm going to Google it. So we get off the phone and I get a call back from her about an hour later. And she says, Caleb, I Googled it. And the first two things to pop up were that Metro Manila has the worst traffic of any city in the world, with a picture of EDSA, right? Like the most stereotypical EDSA picture ever, cars everywhere, right? And she said, and they have the most natural disasters of any place in the world, any country in the world, right? Being right on the Pacific Rim and the typhoons coming in. And I said, okay, hon, does this mean you don't want me to apply? And she said, no, just don't tell my mom. And so I turned in my application later that day, and we moved 8,700-ish miles to be a part of this fight. And so I tell you that I don't advocate for everyone to move 8,700 miles away and experience ECQ in some other country, right? Like that's not what I'm advocating. But what I'm saying, and what I'm hoping that is speaking to your heart right now, is that we all have circles of influence within our profession, within our professional organizations, within our communities, with politicians, with business leaders. We all have contacts of influence. And we have to be a part of this fight to protect these children, especially here in the Philippines, but around the globe. And, you know, I'm just always reminded, if those of us who have the ability to speak into these circles of influence don't use our voice to do that, then who will? Because these children are being trafficked and they don't have that voice. So until we can free them, we have to be their voice. And I just hope that you will be moved to join us in that and help us be a voice for these children.
Awesome story, Caleb. For those of you who are in communities where you think OSEC might actually be occurring, there is a way to report. You can send the report to 744-464 ENDOSEC space and the report details. The next slide is going to show you a few more hotlines. And we can actually work with the Sini Law to make these available on the event page on Facebook for those of you who want to have these numbers. And if you're not able to screenshot this immediately, don't worry, this will be made available to you. But you can report to the Philippine National Police Women and Children's Protection Center. You can also report to the National Bureau of Investigation Anti-Human Trafficking Division and the Department of Justice Interagency Council Against Human Trafficking. As we mentioned in the last slide, smart subscribers do have a method to report through this number 7444-64. And if any of you want to stay updated with IJM, with the work, please take note of our social media handles over here and find us there so that we can find you as well. On behalf of Caleb and myself, we want to say thank you for tuning in and just going through what we've learned and what we can do together. We have questions and a question and answer portion so our dialogue can continue. Maraming salamat.
All right, thank you guys. So can I stop can you stop the sharing?
Yes,
And,
one moment. Sorry about that, Jay.
All right. No, it's okay. Excellent. So we have it. We have it on gallery. There's a couple of questions that came in. One question was breakdown. Do you have breakdown whether how much of this is happening in rural areas versus urban areas?
There within that study, within the full study, there is some data in there about the geography of where we've had cases. You know, that's a really good question. I'm not sure it's one we fully understand. We do tend to see kind of an isolating, like this does tend to pop up, or at least our cases we see are popping up in fairly metropolitan areas. Oftentimes having multiple cases within the same smaller area. So, you know, I think we'll understand that better the longer we continue to work on this issue and the better detection becomes on some of these issues.
Right. So I was thinking about that also. Perhaps, as I understand it, there are hotspots in the country, right, where there's these things are happening in certain places. And I suppose the reason why they are easily identifiable is because it is quite rural. Some of those places are sort of, well, I guess, I would say more rural or less, how would you say this? Why would it be more visible in those areas, do you think? Is it...
Are you talking about like places like, I mean, we've had a clustering of cases in Iligan, for example.
Okay. So it's near a metropolitan area, like a big city. So because they need good internet access.
That's right. There's an infrastructure requirement. So there still needs to be high-speed internet or an internet that supports usually video, right. So that amount. At the same time, as Caleb mentioned, it's difficult to really talk about prevalence confidently. But one thing we have noticed is the more you work a case in a particular area, the more you find. So if once we started doing more cases, for example, in that area of Iligan, there just started to be more that our law enforcement partners were able to discover. And so, again, I guess it's a bit early in really doing law enforcement across the areas where there might be risk. But that's what we've seen so far. The more casework is done, the more you're actually finding this crime type is occurring. It's one of those sad things that we found.
Okay. There's another question. Is there evidence of a big-time OSEC syndicate, or are these, like small or isolated players? That's a bad term. Incidences.
Yeah, that's
go ahead.
Go ahead, Attorney Law. That's a really good question, right? That was So far we do not see any kind of like organized syndication in this. It typically organizes at an offender family level, and then the largest scaling that I could say with any confidence would be like in a community kind of level, right? People in the community may be aware, and or also participating in OSEC. But there doesn't seem to be a larger organization of it at this point in time.
Okay. Well, I get a sense that I mean there is a lot of privacy. This isn't something that you would want to do in a public way. So there's a lot of privacy there. So it doesn't make sense to have a large network. And I suppose I guess it would target those where the revenue stream is quite attractive. There are a lot of questions coming in. I just want to. There's something that I forgot to do that I usually do. I ask people where they're watching us from. And I'd like to go from north to south because I think we've got people all over the country. So from the north, we got somebody from Vigan, Ilocos Sur, Ifugao, CAR, Baguio City, Kawayan City, Isabela, NEUST, Nueva Ecija, Olongapo, Marikina, Quezon City, Parañaque, Manila, Dasmariñas, Cavite, Santa Rosa, Laguna, Daraga, Albay, Cam Norte. We always have somebody from Debesmscat, Masbate, and I can't pronounce that, but one day I hope to go there. Surigao, Cagayan de Oro City, Jensan. We got people from Bulacan. Now they're telling me Antipolo. So we got people all over the country. Taytay, Pangasinan, Bulacan. Welcome. We're glad that you're here with us. This is a very important problem, and I can see from the questions that you're posing that from Lucena as well that you want to help. So there's a question here. Very good question. There was a report from the Anti-Money Laundering Council that connects OSEC to money laundering. Has any work been done along those lines?
Like financial analysis, I'd say it's
Yes.
early. It's early in the work, meaning it's definitely an area that partners are hoping to double down on in terms of harnessing the tools that are available to the
Right.
community. Definitely, our hope is that analysis of financial transactions, for example, might lead to a better understanding and identification of criminal networks. And I
Right.
think that's true not just for OSEC, but other crimes in the trafficking space as well.
That's correct. I think there was some discussion about this. I think the main concern of the financial institutions is the deposit secrecy law, which requires them to keep information confidential. And I think there's also a related issue where it's not. I think for many financial institutions, it's not very clear to them if they should take action. So some work probably needs to happen there. So I think one of the suggestions that I've heard floated around was foreign law enforcement can give a list of, say, convicted or known, right, pedophiles or those convicted of sex crimes, and have that list. And if they transact, send money to the Philippines, then the financial institutions can engage in enhanced due diligence, requiring the Filipino to whom the money is being remitted to prove, right, why, or to give more information as to the underlying transactions. Let me see. People are asking whether there's a gray area. Is more legislation needed to combat this problem?
Okay. Great question. If the question is directed at like, are there gaps
Yes.
in the way the law currently is applied that would require a legislative fix? I would say there are areas that would be helpful if there are legislative fixes, but I'd say in the current, like the way we're currently working, it's best to test out available solutions first before concluding that we actually need to modify something in the law. And a historical example of that is when the first version of the anti-trafficking law was released and it became law, it was very clear that you actually wouldn't be able to do a lot of plea agreements because it wasn't allowed by the framework of that first version. But when the legislature was able to pass the amendment to the anti-trafficking law, it became a lot easier to do plea agreements, and it was actually in the intent of the legislators to allow freedom for child protective measures. And so that's credit to those who worked on that as well. But that's an example of identifying when something really needs a legislative fix or not. So test first to the limit and then see if it's needed.
Okay, there's a question here. Had there been concrete efforts on the part of the DICT as well as the telcos to work against OSEC?
So I'm typically not as well positioned as attorney law to answer governmental related questions, but I've had a really awesome opportunity to engage in some conversations with DICT and some of the technical working groups on this very topic. And so yes, there are conversations going on. This is one of those areas. So IJM, we're in the final stages of a technical paper on this very issue of what ISPs can actually see and what our recommendations are that they do with that or they can do, that hopefully will be released very soon. But the reality is that this is kind of one of those areas that attorney law was just referencing, right, where the law is written quite strictly, but there is a gap between how the law is written and how a practitioner would implement that law, right? And so, you know, developing, implementing guidelines, evaluating that, you know, are really key factors. But there are conversations ongoing about this very issue.
Right. I mean, I imagine one of the issues probably that you're faced with right now is the Data Privacy Act, which is relatively, it was enacted in 2012, but it's gotten a lot of attention in the last 2 or 3 years. I suppose that might be, I can imagine there are a lot of individuals or companies that are hesitant to help out because they're concerned about violating data privacy regulations. Maybe the telcos might fall into that category. But yeah, actually, we have been also been thinking about what sort of interventions telcos could do. I had this idea that, you know, if you see a heightened use of, right, high bandwidth use with say a high use of VPN in a particular community where there is a hotspot, it's a possibility that the telcos, like enhanced due diligence, could throttle, you know, slow down the internet in the area until people can prove that they're using it for legitimate purposes, right? Or find out, and perhaps AI can do that, see where there's clustering of because I'm sure a lot of these are using VPNs, virtual private networks, so the signals are all encrypted. Let me see. So there's a question here about psychological trauma on the victims, and what sort of interventions are being done for them, and how are the survivors doing now?
So I'm not an expert, but I can just share some of the methods that are, or some of the tools that are used by our aftercare teams. And thank you to the past that, because a complex trauma has indeed been observed among OSEC survivors. It happens because there are many layers to the experience. For example, when someone is rescued, they may not necessarily know that everything that's happening to them is wrong. And the first sense of fear and anxiety may come from being separated from their parents in a somewhat jarring and in a way that they just don't understand. So even the rescue itself might cause a trauma wound, and we have to be willing to accept that fact if we are to really meet the survivors where they are. And then when they learn that what happened to them was very wrong, that produces its own set of problems developmentally, and they need to overcome that as well. So one of the methods, first, a general approach, the philosophy of care embraced by the Department of Social Welfare and Development is called trauma-informed care. And again, that is a philosophy of care that sees the survivor as a lot more than just the bad experience. but it also ensures that that experience, which impacted them at a specific moment in time, is recognized and dealt with and not brushed aside. And they do have more complicated therapies like trauma-informed psychotherapy, which they can go through. It's typically quite fast and effective compared to other therapies, but it still takes time. Now, as to how each survivor is doing, everyone's on a different stage of their journey. But I did share that the number of rescued survivors and I'm sorry, restored survivors is increasing year on year. So that's where the hope lies.
Okay. There's a question about economic restoration. Um, I guess that's a very tricky question to ask. I mean, these children are basically, what happens to them in terms of
Sure.
after they're rescued? Yes.
So again, the way that the organization and our partners, especially in aftercare, approach this is clearly, if they're still quite young, they shouldn't be working. So the economic restoration or self-sufficiency aspect does not kick in until they're supposed to be independent. But if they are reaching that age, and there are some survivors reaching that age that are already supposed to be reaching a self-sufficient stage of their lives, then they're connected with networks of care that will help them. So there's She Works, a number of other agencies at work here in the Philippines that look at economic empowerment. So obviously it's not done alone. It's a team effort. It's a community effort, and there are agencies that are stepping up. Some of you who might be interested to connect with those agencies can reach out to us, and then our teams can actually connect you.
Actually, somebody was asking, two people were asking whether if they make a report, somebody reporting, can they maintain confidentiality?
Yes, it can be
Anonymous reports?
anonymized. Yes, it can. You can call the hotlines, and if you really just want to protect yourself, you can. You have the option of not disclosing your identity.
I'm wondering whether, because I'm trying to imagine a situation where there's some evidence that OSEC is happening, and you find yourself in a situation where you're building up the case, but at the same time, there might be enough information for the DSWD, right, to come in and do a child rescue. So now you're choosing between, do we rescue the child, or do we rescue the, because if you rescue the child and there's no criminal case to follow up, it might be that the child might end up where she began, so, or return to that home environment. So do you ever come into those situations, sort of fork in the road, and where you have to make a decision between whether you proceed with a rescue or proceed to build up the case?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So my role as an ICAC specialist is unique in that our longtime existing partnerships with PNP, WCPC, and MBI Atrad allow me to embed and work directly with them within the Philippine Internet Crime Against Children Center. So these conversations happen a lot, right? Like we're constantly evaluating cases, and there's always this conversation, and there has been for a long time, of we know that the core mandate is to protect and rescue those children that are being trafficked. But if you don't attach that to an arrest, does that offender have access to that child later? Does he or she have access to more other children? And so the preferred method, obviously, is always to go in and do both, right? Do a rescue and an arrest. But there have been situations where we knew OSEC was happening, the case just wasn't progressing. Maybe the offender was just being very cagey, very, very careful. And we had to do, a rescue only situation. So that's not that's not like plan A, but we are willing to do it to keep children safe. And I say we, our government partners, right? PNP, MBI, DSWD, right? I say we, and I mean them all collectively with us, because we believe in this collaborative approach. It's IJM's not going out and doing this ourselves. We believe in walking alongside our government partners.
Right.
So
So I think this is one of those areas where governmental intervention has actually quite been very, very effective. A lot of task force, a lot of wins, so to speak. But I think IGM is a plays a central role in that. I think in terms of case build up, but in terms of government support, I do think there's I mean, more is always desired, but I think there is a lot of government support here. So maybe I'll take this time to tell a story about, and I think Lawrence had heard this before. And this is a true story. And this is some sort of a cautionary tale I'd like to tell to the other parents out there, given that a lot of kids right now are on their phones all the time, and you may not see what they're doing. So there was this, I believe she was a young teenager. She's on Facebook, and somebody sends her a private message. The private message says, "Well, good afternoon, Iha. I see that you're a very pretty girl, and I work for this cosmetic company, and we're always looking for young models. Maybe you'd like to be a model. Let me know if you want to be a model." And of course, the child, first they probably have the person contacting the child probably had seen the child's Facebook profile, right? Had seen what she had been posting. So, or then she say, "Okay, yes, I do want to be a model. Okay, don't worry. I'm working for this company. When the time comes and we hire you, we will have your parents sign. So don't worry. But in the meantime, can you send me a picture of yourself?" So then she sends a picture of herself, and then she goes, "Oh, that's good. Can you send me another picture of yourself? But do it this way. Send a picture of yourself in your undershirt without any underwear." And then, so the child will probably hesitate a little, but then she'll send that picture over. And then, they will ask now for, say, a topless shot, right? And then escalate it. And then if the child hesitates, remember that the person contacting the child already knows the child because of the Facebook post. And they'll say something like, "Yeah, if you don't send me that picture, you remember I already have that other picture of you without underwear in the undershirt. So I can release that to your school." So they make threats, right? So it's threats with this, and then it was a good thing that in the matter that I'm aware of, the child spoke to her parents immediately and said, "No, there's something going on. Someone's pressuring me to do this," and then the matter was reported to the police. And in the cybercrime division, at the cybercrime group, at the anti-cybercrime group at the PNP, they told me stories of not just them, but other children who fell prey to the same thing, sort of an escalating level of what you're being asked to do. And somehow at the very extreme level, they've gotten them to, in terms of blackmail, to perform for an anonymous audience. So pedophiles would come in and they would turn on their webcam and they would perform because they're being forced. And in one instance, I think this was reported in the media, where one of the sort of go-betweens wanted to do a face-to-face meeting with the child, and when he did, he was arrested by the PNP. My point is that you have to keep watch over your kids. You have to ask them. It's a good opportunity. I think this is a good opportunity to not only bring light to this problem that other people are facing, but also to know that there are predators and pedophiles out there, and they may be preying on your kids. So make sure that you tell your kids if they get into a situation like this, they should immediately alert you as the parent, and there are things that can be done. So I just wanted to share that story. Now, and I wonder if you have any tips that you could tell parents as well on how their kids can avoid these predators that are out there.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this. So I'll share a little insight into my life. Parents, if you think your kids won't foray into things that could potentially be dangerous, let me tell you, right, they're kids. They will test boundaries. Just this past week, we found out my oldest had created a TikTok, right? And we have a very strict policy on social media and when that's appropriate. And so even, you know, he knows his dad, right, is an internet crimes against children investigator, who has done this for a very long time. He knows my stance on that and on some of those platforms, and he still did it, right? So we had to have a very hard conversation. And I would just say, the biggest thing is media, social media technology. There is no way to separate it from our children's lives at this point. To be successful, they're going to have exposure to some kind of technology. So you have to have these open and transparent communications, right? That's really, really important. Setting good ground rules, you know, being a source that they can come to when there's problems, because the blackmail situations are very common all around the world. They only work if the kid's scared to come to their parents for help, right? If the child is having these open dialogues, then that becomes much more difficult. And I would just recommend, you know, parents, NetSmarts is an excellent resource. There are some excellent resources out there that teach you about some of the apps and some of the dangers that exist for parents and kids with those. Just be active advocates for your children in that area, and have really open and transparent conversations with them.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions about, well, there's a question here about, is there a need for cyber cops and cyber technologies to fight this? I think the answer to that question is yes. No? And there are, people may not be aware, but there have been a lot of, or there are a lot of people in government right now, right, in the PNP and the NBI, who are experts at the forensics side of it. But I think one of the difficulty now is a lot of this happens. It's not on the internet, but sort of on what they call the dark net, no? And I remember hearing the story of a police officer before, where he would stalk these pedophile groups, and then apparently it's not easy to enter them anymore, because they want, before you can be let in, they need to see proof. They need to see proof that could land you in jail. So they want to see you doing something illegal, and that's their way. It's that sort of if you don't show us that something that can land you in jail, we won't let you in. So it's very, very difficult now for law enforcement to do their job.
And
yes, go ahead.
Really quickly, I really, you know, Philippine law enforcers, I need to take an opportunity here to compliment them. Yes, we need more of them, right? They're overworked. The caseload is incredibly high. But the ones we have, right? The men and women working out of the PICAC, you know, MBI, OTROD, PMPW, CPC, the personnel and the analysts working at the Department of Justice Office of Cybercrime, I've worked around professionals in this space all around the world, and they are as capable and as good as anywhere else at this point. They are quite good. They're global leaders on some of these issues. You know, so that's coming from a U.S. law enforcement perspective. I actually have to be quite complimentary to where Philippine law enforcement is in their capability. You know, we always, no matter where you are in the world, have room to grow, and we need some other factors to start to play in to help them out. But yeah, the law enforcement capabilities and the abilities of those men and women working in those agencies is quite good.
That's good to hear. I think we're running out of time. There's a last question here, and then I think I'd like to ask you guys to give your parting shots. There's a question that says, I want to help in my own little way. What can I do? How can I reach you? What are the things that sort of individually in our own small way can we contribute to fighting this? And then you can go on to your closing comments.
So the question is, what can they do in their own small way?
Yes.
Right, and they are.
I think people in the, as you mentioned earlier, right? The people who are watching us are people in their own communities.
Right.
They may be able to do something. What possibly could be done to help?
Okay. So some of our friends in branding and comms, they like to say that a lot of people aren't going to be able to do anything about a problem that they don't know about. So it does help. Like that is like step one. Knowledge will give that power to people to act. So if you have knowledge today and you want to keep spreading it, one practical thing we can do is, find our channels, follow along, keep learning and passing on what you are learning. I love that JJ mentioned that thing about taking care of our own kids, because as a parent, I too am concerned. When you raise that, JJ and Caleb also shared. I thought of my own children who are getting into that age where they can be online, and of course, I am with you in the same boat. I want to keep our kids safe, not just, so I'm a major stakeholder in that, also for my own family, but indeed for the community. So yes, JJ, there was a question on accountability abroad. Is it okay if I
Yeah,
speak to
go
that for
ahead.
a bit? So I wanted
Please
to
do.
assure those on the webinar that yes, accountability in demand side countries is happening, not only to get convictions, but also to ensure that the sentences are appropriate. So some countries are further along than others when it comes to appropriate sentencing, but there's a general recognition in the community of nations that are with a nexus to OSEC that there has to be strong accountability, and if there are gaps, those gaps need to be filled.
All right. And I think on that note, I mean, a lot of these, as you said, demand side countries, their law enforcement is actually here. They have programs. I think I've met people from Australia, UK, right? So they are here. Of course, the US. They're here and they're trying to combat this problem on both sides, on both ends, so to speak. All right. So maybe some parting words, Caleb.
Yeah, thank you. So, I met with the Philippine Association of Money Remittance Compliance Officers yesterday in a webinar, and we had a really, really healthy discussion about some ideas about how they can detect, right? So, similarly, we're having discussions with legal professionals, law enforcement professionals, governments, tech, financial, right? And there's always some kind of roadblock. The hardest step is always the first step to take, right? And so I said to them yesterday, and I'll say it to everyone here, right? Is that we need people to be innovative. We need people to be willing to take that hard first step and try new things, to continue to find innovative international solutions to this issue. My grandpa, he always used to tell me, everybody said it was impossible to fly around the world. That you would, escape the bonds of gravity, or that you would, crash and die surely, right? It was always impossible until somebody did it, right? And now we can, prior to COVID, we can fly around the world. I could get online and buy a ticket and within a day be flying around the entire world, right? So it was only impossible until somebody did it. And so, that's where we're at, right? Is that this is a really kind of large mountain to climb, but I think we've shown it is possible. And within these other industries, we just need to, take away this idea of impossible and take those first steps.
All right. Thank you, Lawrence.
Yes. So for everybody, when JJ said there's a chance to give a parting shot, I have an object lesson I like to teach a lot of my friends when they have that sort of sense of not really being able to start or to do something about a problem. And I happen to have here with me a shirt that illustrates, that I used to illustrate why everyone has a role to play or can do something. First, I need to make sure it can be read. Can you read this, or is it the other way around? Should I flip it horizontally? Let me do a flip using the camera app. So, okay, you should be able to read it now.
Yeah, we can read it. Yeah.
Perfect.
Right,
Okay,
right.
but the letters are all broken. I mean, you're not
Yeah,
even
that is broken.
right. The letters are broken, but you know what it says. It says liberty. Something in our brains, something in us, already knows how to make broken things whole. And that's an object lesson I love to use for people that feel a little lost on where to begin. A lot of the most important tools you need to fix the problems around you are there. And we just proved it together, didn't we? We read it, liberty. And so that's also what I'm seeing. Even when we struggle to find solutions in prosecution, we remember that it's not really about the technical expertise. It's about wanting to uphold human dignity. And if we can remember that, then the solutions will present themselves, or we will do what it takes to find them. Thank you.
Wow, I don't know how to top that. So I will thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Caleb, for coming here today and speaking to the DTT community. I was talking the other night to Al Alegres with the Commission on Human Rights, and we were talking about doing a series of DTT episodes focusing on human rights. And then I mentioned OSEC. I said, yeah, that's child rights. That's part of human rights. So it seems we've started down this road, and this is important. I think digital human rights is a segment that has not gotten enough attention, and we're very happy to be the venue to bring this out, because I think this is a major social problem among all of the other social problems that we're facing. So I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to close this session. It's been somebody mentioned earlier, it's heart-rending, but very informative. And I think the message that both Caleb and Lawrence would want you to take home is tell others, be a witness, make people know and be aware so that they can do something as well. That's enough. It's enough to draw attention to the problem, and then we can move forward. So I'd like to thank you again. I'm so grateful, and I'm very happy that this really we pulled this off. And thank you for Caleb for staying up all night. It's 4 in the morning. It's now getting to 6 a.m. So it's about ready to wake up. I know I say I can understand that he can wake up that early, because it really shows you the kind of passion that he has for this thing. And this is really something that you can really devote your life to. And as I said, this is one of those things where absolutely it's the right and the wrong. So nothing could be more clear. So on that note, I'd like to close this session of Digital Transformation Thursdays. We'll see you next week. Thank you.